Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. Those of you in the room, those turning in online, we're delighted to welcome you to the Stimson Center and for what promises to be an interesting, important, and timely conversation. My name is Rachel Stoll. I'm Senior Vice President of Research Programs here at the Stimson Center. At Stimson, we've built a reputation over the last 35 years for developing practical solutions to some of the world's most pressing challenges, from promoting peace and security to advancing economic development and driving responsible innovation in technology and governments. But in times of rapid and profound change, practical solutions cannot be built in a vacuum. Credible and durable solutions must be grounded in clear-eyed understanding of the transformations that are shaping our world. That's why we are so pleased today to host a conversation exploring the world to come. It's a very dramatic title. The Return of Trump and the End of the Old Order, co-authored by two respective voices in global strategic foresight, Matt Burrows and Josef Braml. Many of you already know Matt Burrows, a Stimson Center Distinguished Fellow, through his years of service at the National Intelligence Council, where he led the development of the NIC's signature Global Trends Report. For those who don't know, these seminal reports provide forward-looking assessments that have informed decision makers at all levels, from government to finance and industry. And grounded in this experience and following a 30-year career in the CIA, Matt has continued to offer vital insights on the trajectory of global power, governance, and disruption. His co-author, Josef Braml, brings a sharp European lens to this work. Based in Germany, Josef has closely tracked the internal shifts that are reshaping Europe and the wider geopolitical ripple effects that these shifts may produce. Together, their collaboration offers a sobering but critical exploration of a world to come. In examining the return of Donald Trump to the US presidency and what this return symbolizes for the unraveling of the post-World War II liberal order, Matt and Josef grapple with rapid and dramatic geopolitical transformation at the highest levels. In addition, World to Come takes on growing global instability exacerbated by changing climate, regional conflict, disruptive technologies like AI, and rising populist movements. In earlier eras, voyagers embarking on uncertain journeys brought a compass. In today's global journey, marked by volatility, fragmentation, and unknown risks, we need new tools to orient ourselves. And this book and today's conversation really offers us an opportunity to orient and calibrate in tumultuous times. Our authors don't have all the answers, but in their new book, Matt and Josef challenge us to ask the right questions and to prepare us for a future that will look very different from the world we have known. We're truly honored to host this discussion here at Stimson and to build a multifaceted discourse on the future of the international world order. Before we launch into our conversation, I want to take a moment to note this event is being recorded. It will be available in full on stimson.org/events. Today's event will leave time at the end for questions for the audience. So for those of you tuning in online, you can submit your questions at stimson.org/questions. For our guests that are here in the room with us, hold on to your questions. It's going to be tough. Hold on to your questions. We will be coming around with a microphone during the Q&A portion of the program. With that, let me turn it over to our moderator, Financial Times U.S. National Editor and columnist, Ed Luce. Ed, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Can you hear me? I look forward to the discussion. I must say, Matt pointed out earlier, not to hold it like that with the Statue of Liberty the right way up, because it's not in Arabic, it's not in Japanese. This is in English, and this is a very good cover for a slim, very efficiently delivered volume, and I couldn't think of two better people. I know Matt very well for many years, but from what I know of you, Joseph, that to do justice to the post-world order world we've now gone into, the world to come. Now, you wrote this in and around the presidential election before November, and then I guess you finished it after the election. And the world seems to have arrived since then. The world to come has arrived, and it seems to arrive in a different way every single day, whether it's, J.D. Vance basically calling for the end of the ancien regime in liberal democratic Europe from Munich, of all places, on Valentine's Day, of all days, or Trump coveting Greenland by any means necessary, Gaza Strip, Riviera, and to go on. And then, of course, yesterday, the declaration of economic war on the rest of the world. This is happening in a more telescope way than you could imagine. And I ought to sort of say that it must be a really difficult time to be a realist, because Trump is sort of technically somebody who might have auditioned for that role. And I've seen many Trump sane washers, for want of a better term, attempt to try and inhabit that narrowing bit of the shaded Venn diagram between justifying what Trump's doing and being explicable to everybody else. And he's just deprived, and one of whom has a Scottish accent and lives on the West Coast, but I won't mention his name. But that ground, Trump just keeps robbing people of that ground. So at the end of your book, you say this world to come, this world that has arrived, this could upend pretty much everything we value. And you wrote that in November. What do you say now in early April? And I'll start with you, Matt, and then move on to Joseph.
I think he's well on his way to doing that, upending everything. I think what the world and we in the U.S. thought we stood for. I think, in my mind, Trump is not, despite his profession in building high rises and tearing down part of the old New York skyline, he's just in for tearing down. We use a quote in this book by Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was a Marxist philosopher in Italy, thrown into jail by Mussolini and died there. And he said, in his quote, the old world is dying, the new order struggles to be born. This is the age of monsters. And I think, it's just not Trump, but I would put Putin, I would put Xi in that category. Now, they had, certain beefs about the U.S.-dominated order. What makes it different with Trump is he's tearing down an order that the U.S. created. And in some ways, thinking about this, in 30 years ago, when I was getting started as a CIA analyst, I was in the Office of European Analysis, and suddenly the Berlin Wall came down. Well, for an analyst, that's a great thing, because now you make your career on helping, in that case, the George W.H. Bush administration think about that, including German unification. I think 30 years later, and also at that time, I think the idea was that the U.S. was going to open to the rest of the world. But the idea, which was, faulty, but it was this end of history, thinking that the rest of the world was coming to resemble us now with our values, and we would help them. Now, obviously, it got off the rails with the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, but there was still this openness. Now, this is the other bookend, and it's closing the U.S. off. And I think that's a profound mistake. And I don't think it's one that even maybe those who elected Trump necessarily want. But nevertheless, I don't think, particularly with yesterday, I don't think the rest of the world's going to trust the U.S. for at least a generation.
And so you quoted Gramsci, just to follow up, and then in a moment, Joseph, I'll get to you, but you quoted Gramsci. I sort of fished out that well-worn, but I think instructive Arnold Toynbee quote for a column this week, which is that civilizations are not murdered, they commit suicide. Are we in a sort of suicidal phase here?
I think it is, but as I said, I'm not sure that the American people want it that way.
I agree.
And of course, Trump thinks it's a great revival, it's the golden era. You know, he has these ideas that we're going to now become the greatest economic power after we've cut ties with everybody else. But I do think, you know, it is a sort of suicide.
Okay, sorry, you did end with that. Joseph, we were just discussing beforehand, I was in Germany last week, and you know, if you had to sort of pick a list of who's reacted most quickly and most dramatically to the world to come arriving, it would be Germany. I didn't have it in my playbook that Germany would embrace Keynesianism, essentially, maybe not for pro-Keynes reasons, but for other reasons. But $1 trillion, lifting the debt brake, changing the constitution, spend on infrastructure, spend on defense. This is serious, right? The world, there's no turning back from this, or am I sort of overstating it?
I mean, on that happy note we ended before, let's give even a happier preview. Maybe Trump will get the Charlemagne Prize for European unification. He may not deserve it on his own. You know, we identified different monsters, so Trump, Xi Jinping, and Putin, so they may all do their part in the creative destruction, as Schumpeter probably would call it, and I think the economists around him, they think down those roads. They think something's got to go for something else to be built up. But there will be damage, there will be lots of damage, and damage will be a lot for Germany, and I'm not sure whether the Germans were really waking up that early. I thought we would have had that wake-up call before, but we put it on the snooze button for quite some time, and it took really his re-election that people actually stopped snoozing it and got out of bed. I mean, one guy didn't get it, that's why the coalition broke. He thought he could still save and act like we were in the 80s. But the still chancellor realized, okay, this is going to be expensive, and this is mostly about defense. So basically, the old order is gone, and with that, Pax Americana. I remember pointing out to that a couple of years ago that this day may come because it has structural moments. And here, I would say Trump doesn't deserve the full credit. I think Trump, and that's what we basically put down, is just the final blow. I think the order has been crumbling before, and it started crumbling 2007, 2008, when the magic was gone. And all of a sudden, people, especially the Chinese, realized their system wasn't necessarily worse. And then the Chinese realized, okay, we could have our own structure, our own ideas, and America woke up from their dream of end of history. Germans took a few years later to wake up of that end of history, and now we see an irony of history. You know, the world was supposed to be free trading like America and be democratic. So neither Russia fell into that line nor China. Now it's not the Washington consensus, it's the Beijing consensus that America is now adopting. And that's the biggest problem. America doesn't stick to its own guns that were useful for the old Cold War. Now this Trump thinks we can do a new Cold War decoupling, and that decoupling has been going on. Even the Financial Times has a few journalists who were into decoupling. And when you realize the Financial Times...
Not me.
No, it's Madame Frodoha. She was all decoupling, but when you think it through, this is not neoliberalism any longer. This is not the Washington consensus. And when the Vatican goes astray, and I would say Financial Times is part of the Vatican, then you realize, okay, maybe we will have a different religion. So basically, our point is this has been coming, so not a big surprise. What's surprising is the speed. I mean, this is really surprising when you see it to unfold in front of your eyes, how fast and all that is. But what we will make out of it, hopefully will help with that book to create a more positive future. Because we can learn from history. And Antonio Gramsci didn't survive that, you know. He didn't see that order. We learned what comes after decoupling and what had you in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariffs Act. I mean, we may have had a same day yesterday where then fascism would come again.
Yeah, can I say, I mean, I want to get onto the sort of yesterday's announcement and the decoupling, or if we're looking at Europe and China, recoupling. I mean, it's not just decoupling we're talking about here. But let's just start from what led up to this. Now, you mentioned in your book the by now well-known fact that more working class people voted for Trump than voted for Kamala Harris. This is an extraordinary situation, you know, for the right, not just the center-right, but hard-right party to get more of the working class, but one with echoes from history, including from your country. What is it, do you think, that the people who voted for Trump, Matt, thought they were going to get, and how big a divergence is that from what it is that they are getting?
Well, I'll answer this by mentioning something that my mother told me that, you know, at the time she was living in Ohio, so this is right in the area, I mean, where Trump has suddenly become popular. And I said, why do people vote for Trump? And she said, desperation. And when you think about, I mean, one of the issues that Americans really haven't grappled with is their society is extremely unequal. Most unequal among Western states. And then when you look at the working class, real incomes have halved since 1970. And the Democrats did not seem to, and particularly I think under Biden, didn't realize just with the inflation how much pain there was out there. As you remember, Biden was campaigning at one time on how great his Bionomics was, with everybody else thinking, I mean, he must have, well, we know. But I don't think the party has really, I mean, they got, you know, their own interests, I would say, were cultural. And their base was trying to just survive and to have some hope for the future. So this is, I think, an issue, and obviously a lot of people were blaming China. We talk about this in the book, and how that was really a false accusation. You know, what we never talk about in this country is education, in the political sphere anyway. I mean, educators talk about it, but basically we have falling standards. We have a very vibrant technology sector, but how are you going to prepare, you know, all the young coming up for that kind of world? There was very little discussion in the campaign about it. So I think that was, they were, you know, they decided they didn't want Biden, and they didn't want his replacement, Kamala Harris, because they weren't offering anything new to help with this declining standard of living. So they're grasping, and Trump, you must admit, is a communication genius. He picks up on people's feelings. He amplified them. And you know, when you're in a desperate situation, you tend to be gullible. And culturally, too, there was this, you know, he makes fun of the elites and so on, and that played well as well for those people who are, as I said, are really suffering. So I think that was the motive. It was more a comment on the previous administration than I think a vote for Trump.
So you mentioned education and, well, perhaps the decline of education implicitly, but it strikes me when we're looking at why it was that a democratic establishment and sort of, for want of a better term, a liberal elite that kept saying democracy is on the line, and people kept not hearing them or not believing them or not caring, that if you look at Germany, where history has provided an education, and you look at the fact that the areas where the history of Germany has not been taught, namely former East Germany, and indeed Austria, those are the two places, German-speaking places, most prone to far-right extremism. Is there something to that? I mean, and how can America invent a history that gives it a warning when it doesn't have that history?
To start a bit earlier, I think education is one thing, but it's not only stupid white rednecks voting for Trump. I mean, it's different kinds of people and even people you wouldn't suspect. And so there is something deeper going on, and I think it is this realization that especially inflation has been hurting a lot. So when you talk about unequal societies, inflation really hurts those most. And here many people were ignorant. Also observers in Germany. They thought Kamala Harris would be the right girl at the right time, taking care of abortion rights and saving democracy. And I think German established parties made the same mistake. You know, trying to save democracy. That's something very abstract to at least people I know. I come from more humble means. They don't worry about what we political scientists and in our small elite bubble think about democracy and its dangers. They need to pay their bills, work 2 or 3 jobs in America. And I was at the Republican Party convention in Milwaukee, and it was inflation, inflation, inflation. And immigration, which is an economic issue too, some cultural, but most of it is the economy. And even James Carville, and we put him in the book, and he was honest enough, he said, well, I didn't get it. The one who basically pointed out for Clinton, it's economy stupid, realized, okay, I dropped that ball. So on this one, I think on both sides of the aisle, we have to worry about issues that concern our voters. Not what we think in our cafe latte shops and in our elite bubbles, but some folks are hit by inflation. Yes, inflation came down, but what about the 35% of basic inflation, how food and rent and everything got more expensive? So people were struggling, and Trump got in there and knew, okay, I hit that, while Democrats were far off the ball. And he had some help too. I think it's also an issue, how would I put that? Hillary Clinton helped Trump by looking down on his electorate as a bunch of deplorables. Yeah. And well, Biden did the same when he looked down on garbage. So and that's how you really get those fired up to append the system. So on this one, I think Trump had a basis for what he's doing. Some people are sick and tired of the institutions. Trump realized that, not the Democrats. And so he's not only turning the world upside down, and we will have an interregnum, and hopefully we don't have an interregnum in America, because this system is challenged as it is.
Well, I mean, I will ask you later, so you can think about it, whether democracy is dying in America, the blunt question. But let me just get to the economics now, because we've got an administration, we've got a president who promised to bring prices down, not just inflation, but actual prices down. And it's clearly with, this 25 to 30% average weighted tax on all imports. He's clearly moving prices in the opposite, and inflation in the opposite direction. And we have the rest of the world, as we alluded to earlier, not ending trade, but actually they're going to be trading more with each other and doing more deals with each other. So the sort of autarky here is an American declaration. Matt, what form would buyer's remorse take if that is what the American electorate's going to feel? And then we'll get on to the post, we'll get on to what to expect from the post-US-led order.
Well, I think we're beginning to see that already in Wisconsin earlier this week. I mean, I don't know how much Elon, he poured, 20 or 25 million into this campaign, and there are a whole bunch of other Republican donors who also contributed. And what did they get? I think the calculation is there was a swing of 1% maybe, but it's still 10% that voted for the Democratic judge. So I think by the midterms you may see actually a much bigger movement. What I would hope, and I think this is one of the problems, is the Democratic Party really hasn't figured out how to do this. I mean, other than Bernie Sanders. And there's a lot of divisions within the party, and they actually need to come together and begin to strategize on what they're going to what things they're going to really battle, and how they're going to campaign, and how they're going to reconnect with their base. And it can't be, I told you so. It has to be actually much more constructive of how we are changing, because we realize that we didn't get it the last election.
So the economic longer-term implications of this, I mean, regardless of where how quickly and to what extent the tariff war escalates, strikes me, in terms of the futurology in your book, it strikes me that the question of the dollar's status is now, for the first time, really in question. I mean, we've heard lots of theorizing about this over the years because of secondary sanctions and BRICS and so forth, but BRICS is a very disparate group. Any group with China and India in it is not going to agree to anything too profound. But now we've got, as I say, a declaration of economic war on the rest of the world, so which some have compared to Trump's economic equivalent to George Bush Jr.'s Iraq war in terms of this seismic impact of this. And bearing in mind the sort of cryptocurrency, the strategic Bitcoin reserve stuff going on as well, how would you evaluate the dollar's future, Joseph?
There's another element. You have mentioned decoupling and freezing central banks' reserves, like the Russians. That's new in world history. So every autocratic regime now thinks twice whether they really put all their eggs in the dollar basket. So you have that moment.
Or in Belgium.
Or, yeah.
Yeah.
Or whether the world is still ready to finance dollar-dominated T-bills, treasury bills. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not the long-term future. That's something very short-term that may also help Democrats if the markets crash, say, okay, this was a problem. So you have heavy debt, 36 trillion, you call it in this country. 36 trillion, Trump will add another 10 trillion, conservatively adjusted, and the world isn't really hungry for financing American debt. I mean, basically, they're getting out of it. The Chinese have gotten out of it for their reasons. Only the Europeans were that stupid and got in and didn't let that money work on their own turf, for their own defense, for their own infrastructure. But now we have a change, as you mentioned, starting. But there were many who wouldn't finance long-term treasury bills, so they had to sell short-term bills. And those will mature, have to be rolled over. And people around Trump now think, okay, we could make 100 years out of it and just declare it this way. So America has a financing problem. You know, America is highly indebted, and I haven't talked about the private sector, credit card debts, consumer debts, car debts, student loans, and all that. That's worse than before 2007, 2008, and we have seen that movie. And the second version of a movie is never better than the first one.
Do you expect, I mean, you alluded, short-term debt to be converted forcefully into
I wouldn't be
perpetual bonds? Because that would be a mega event.
Yeah.
Are you expecting that to happen?
I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, there are people around him, they float those ideas. And the other thing is the inflation thing where markets could be nervous. I mean, one thing is, yes, inflation comes back, not only because of decoupling and tariffs. Millions of Latin Americans are being thrown out. That's expensive. That's inflationary. So you have inflationary pressure picking up. And then Trump deciding, well, Jay Powell needs to not raise interest rates, but put it down. And I guess
the Turkey model.
Yeah, we will all agree that's where markets will panic when the independence of the central bank is in danger. So, and that's not far out in the future.
Matt, can you game this same one out? And bearing in mind the Bitcoin dimension to this too.
Yeah, I think the bigger picture is, you know, the Chinese RMB isn't going to replace the dollar. So you may have something like we did have in the 1930s. So you really, the Bank of England wasn't strong enough. U.S. withdrew there. And then you had obviously Germany and the Soviet Union, who had not been, you know, part of the Versailles Pact, also not, you know, wanting to be bystanders in this. And so nobody can manage the system. And, you know, I think we have it in the book, but, you know, are the Chinese, if we have another financial crisis like we did in 2008, but for other reasons, it could be just that we can't balance the books, are the Chinese going to help out? I doubt it. So you have the potential, I think, for a bigger, you know, not just a recession here or maybe in a few other countries, but a more widespread crisis. And that's the concerning thing that you know, everybody, that's the time and place when, as we saw in the 1930s, when you get conflict and really a full breakdown of the system.
All sorts of morbid symptoms appear. I mean, I want to get through the certain other things, and I am going to get people in about 5-10 minutes to ask questions online and here. I mean, I don't know how many people do have questions, so that will, a reasonable number. The geopolitics of this, I mean, that's the sort of geoeconomics, and they're all sort of part of the same thing. But the geopolitics of Europe, everybody's saying we're all Gaullists now in Europe, and even the British are getting halfway to saying that, is that Europe has not just strategic autonomy in an abstract sense, but in terms of the arms it buys. We've all heard about the semi-mythical kill switch on the F-35, which I think originated from Denmark, a genius sort of meme, by the way. But there is kind of a kill switch on the British nuclear deterrent. Germany talks about having the French-British nuclear umbrella cover it. I don't know whether that's practical, but certainly investing in weapons that come from elsewhere, preferably from Europe, this is a 5-10 year project. This isn't something you do overnight. It's not going to save Ukraine. Correct? Joseph? Oh, well, either, both of you.
Correct. It's not going to save Ukraine. And, first, we don't know if Trump is going to be able to get a deal. So you may have, Russians aren't adverse to these conflicts, the frozen conflicts that go on. And they're in a favorable position that way where, so that could be the end result, and Europe struggling to help the Ukrainians while we decide to turn our backs on it. And that, festering like other potential conflicts around the world.
But I mean, Joseph, it's fair to say that even if they did get together 20,000 troops, so French, British, some Baltics, and put them as a sort of guarantor of whatever deal does emerge, if a deal emerged, and there is no American backstop, then they're sitting ducks, aren't they?
I agree. I think we now have to pay still tribute, but and now I come back to your basic question about geopolitics,
Yeah.
and here I would link it to what we just said was geoeconomy. So the economy can be used as a weapon. Dollar can be used as a weapon that incentivizes others to get around that. But the other coin of the medal, or the other side of the same coin, is that if you provide protection, then you can expect tribute. We paid tribute 85 with the Plaza Accord, especially the Japanese. But now, when the trust, as you said, is gone, why would we give in our economic and our currency interests and suck up? Now this is gone. Now we have an incentive, and now I come back to the very beginning, to have common European debt. And the problem was, or the beauty of the dollar was, there was no alternative. And now there is an alternative. Short of a crash, I think there is another option now. People can hedge now in Eurobonds. If we don't get our act together in Europe's smaller circle, let's get the Brits in. They have a military.
I mean, you need big deficits, right?
We need deficits, but
that's how these markets
that's
work.
what you do. That means you offer depth. Only America has deep markets. Well, in America, this money may be gone as in 2007 to 8.
Germany would tolerate the big spending deficits.
That's what we indicate.
That it would require.
Yes, we were the laggards.
Okay.
So that's why I was surprised. We were the last ones who got it. I mean, the French have been pressuring us. Hey, come on, let's do some common debt. Let's finance our own military. We don't have to pay tribute. It won't be from today to tomorrow. We can have an own IT infrastructure. We can have the future combat air system. That's not only fighter jets. That would replace, in the far future, the F-35. We could go down to the F-18 and buy not 35 F-35s and keep the money here and offer debt. And this way we would rival the dollar.
Okay, so bearing in mind the time.
And this is really, that would be a tipping point, and I'm not sure whether Trump realizes
I'm
that.
an authoritarian when it comes to the clock. China. This is, after sort of its own self-inflicted problems, particularly during and after COVID, this is kind of another sort of windfall, geopolitical windfall for China, isn't it, Matt?
I mean, particularly when you're putting, 47% tariffs on Taiwan and on, similar on Vietnam and other Southeast Asian countries. I mean, you've eliminated, any reason for them to support the U.S.
And how will
because
China,
of the trust. I mean, before this, they were looking at the U.S. military helping them, as a kind of the counterbalance to China. But I think now that trust is completely gone. And China, with already the real motor and engine, I mean, there's no other, to really compete.
How close will Europe get to China, and will it tolerate the flood of cheap everything, EVs, solar panels, that's going to result from all the trade diversion?
I think there's going to be, at least the Europeans and particularly the Germans are going to try to do a deal with the Chinese on, Chinese helping them out in joint ventures in Europe to help energize the German auto industry and get them into EVs. And, that can be very significant. I mean, I think it, will pull Europe, much closer to China.
But the idea of friend-shoring just makes no sense anymore, right?
Well, friends and foes are different these days. Trump sees even foes in his own country, and so, now, when we are threatened that the American president may take over Greenland, it's difficult to do friendshore.
Indeed, indeed. I feel like, I'm going to ask one more question because I know there will be plenty, and there are also online. But let's just switch region. The chances that there will be an Israeli-US attack on Iran or war with Iran in some shape or form in the next months, years?
I tend to think he's going to try to avoid that, because we know that the Saudi crown prince has warned him that the Iranians will turn around and attack the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, and obviously that would have, that really would bring down the global economy. So I think he will avoid it, but, the pressure on him, because the Israelis really want the U.S. to help them destroy the nuclear facilities, and they probably need the U.S. to make sure that they do destroy the ones in Natanz very deep underground. And I'm not sure, if Trump has, started this maximum pressure. I'm not sure whether there's enough back channel efforts really to get some talks going. So he may have miscalculated with his maximum pressure. Instead of, getting people to fall on their knees and beg you for something, they may put their backs up, and then we will be in a situation where, an attack is more likely. I do think one part of the discussions with Putin are about helping out and trying to get the Iranians to stand down, and I think Putin will probably, because that's about the last remaining ally in the Middle East. Just to go back to your Ukraine question, if the French and British and others, put troops in, which I think is, given that I think Putin is dead set against it, but if they would put it in, I think you may be approaching a Suez crisis situation, because under Trump, I don't think they would help them out. And maybe, in the Suez crisis, Britain became, under Macmillan, closer and closer to the U.S., and de Gaulle wanted, well, we can't trust them. I think you will, and again, as you mentioned about the Gaullists, everybody becoming Gaullists, the UK could become Gaullists. So far, no outrageous statement that Trump has made has yet moved them, I think, away from the special relationship. But that could.
Britain going Gaullist. Zut alors. Who has question? Yes, you wait for the microphone.
Diana Negroponte from the Wilson Center, which was closed down at midday today. So I'll be coming and asking Simpson if they've got a corner for me. But I have a comment and a question. And my comment is the following. Trump has warned us that today was Liberation Day with the trade tariff consequences. But tomorrow the negotiations begin. And each of these countries will seek a deal with Trump. And Trump will be in the king's seat determining who gets what. That's what he wants. But negotiations will result in the cutting of tariffs for certain people in exchange for. So this is the global scenario that we face today. And I agree, Edward, this is economic warfare. Now my question. You have said that democracy in the United States is eroding. Can you address the role of the courts in holding on to our democracy?
Matt.
They have been very valiant, but, you know, I think the question is, will Trump agree to some of these rulings? So far, he, on most cases, although there was a Salvadorian flight the other day, so that was in contravention with the judge's orders. And I think most likely he will go and continue to reject judges' rulings when they conflict with his major campaign promises, particularly on immigration. And look, you know, I think the bigger question, to tell you the truth, is these large law firms like Weiss who are making deals. I mean, I think this is probably the most outrageous thing that is really happening. And this is giving in, and we know when that starts, that's where democracy begins to shrivel up. And I think also with the universities. Columbia has what, how many billions, tens of billions of endowment. Harvard has the largest endowment. And when, you know, Trump sends a request for payment or withholding a payment for $400 million, they begin to crack. I mean, and where is the alumni here? I mean, that seems to me really, you know, we talked a lot about the working class not paying too much attention to democracy, but this is the elite. And some of these law firms are really elite in terms, so.
Yeah, the Harvard endowment is bigger than the GDP of more than 100 countries. Not put together, but separately. Because of the time, I want to get through more questions. I'm going to give priority to, there's several online, but I'll give priority to anybody here who wants to ask one. Sir. and a sort of brief.
Right.
Given the time.
The word for the Trump administration, it seems to me, is retribution. He wants to, you know, vengeance on everything possible, and it's centered on him, of course, as you just said. I'm wondering if Germany is reflecting any of that as well, or Germany and Europe, because it seems to me to be coloring our entire political debate here. The body politic is angry, and retribution, you know, fits with that, but it doesn't leave much for the Democrats, say, to do in terms of a positive agenda, because all the language is negative. It's how can we hurt somebody, not how can we help anybody.
Joseph.
Well, if half of America doesn't really care about it or is disorganized and leaves it up to an 80-plus-year-old to put the troops together, Germany is far away, and we can't change that. So we are realistic. But, you know, there are obviously no people left who we used to call grown-ups. You know, John Bolton and those guys. I remember when I started getting my feet wet with the Bush junior administration, Bolton was about the scariest thing we could think of. And now Trump won. He was a savior.
So
He
we're
saved us from something
defining
else.
adulthood downwards.
Yeah, yeah. And now those guys are gone, and he's surrounded, except for Besson and maybe 2 or 3 others, surrounded by people who are not really skilled in diplomacy and not really coming out of these splendid think tanks you have here. It's people, who make up their lack of knowledge with loyalty. They have to kiss the ring. And that's retribution. So the never-Trumpers are gone, the others who betrayed him and wrote this anonymous letter in the New York Times. That was a smart thing, that he would get even more, excited to have his circles closed. And now he has really people, they are vetted at the Heritage Foundation, and they are loyalists, and we realize that, but we can't do anything about it. It's your democracy, you have to say first. I think now you saved the rest of the world. Now I guess you have to spend a little more attention on your own country before you French-shore and lead the world to have the democratic regimes against the autocratic ones.
Okay, so last chance for a floor question. Going. Oh, no, going on. Yes, you. Sorry, sir.
Thanks. This question's for Matt. One of the defining features of the old international system, old international order, was that it had components that were meant to disincentivize conflict. Some of those things now seem like they're being transformed as incentives to conflict. Trade is a great example of this. I want to know if you had any thoughts on other elements of the old order that might be inverting and becoming causes for conflict or causes for instability in the new order.
Well, one of the things we haven't talked about at all, and we have a section on the global south or the developing world. And obviously we've seen conflicts and now internationalized conflicts there pick up. And these are in Ethiopia, Myanmar, other countries. And I would expect to see, particularly when both the U.S. and Europe are cutting back on their assistance. China doesn't have the deep pockets it did. And you have these big issues like climate change and so on, that basically you have a recipe for states that are, trying to hold together, but have a lot of internal divisions that you're going to see that sort of conflict. I do think, Trump, and we haven't said many positive things about Trump, but one thing, he does seem to have a fear of World War III, and I think this is a generational thing. I have the same fear, and Biden, who talked a lot about World War III. So maybe not in the next 4 years, but and Josef and I have written a book on that one. It's published in Germany, but U.S. and China. That seems particularly, if we find we're at the short end of the stick with these tariffs, that we didn't bring China down, instead China seemed to be more powerful because of them, I think you are setting yourself up for what could be a major war.
We've got time for 2 more questions, if they are posed quickly and answered quickly. Yes. And priority to people here. So.
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm Nevada Lee, I work here at the Stimson Center. Talking about, you were saying it's up to Americans to save their democracy, and obviously things that would, in previous administrations, be pressures to the executive branch, falling markets, dissent within their party, Trump seems somewhat immune to it. So what levers do American people have to change the course of this administration? Is it mass protest? Is it public pressure? What tools are left out there? Because it seems like so many that previously could be used to sway the executive branch are null and void for this one.
I wouldn't give up on the markets. You haven't seen the end game. So if markets really go down in 2 years, we have midterms, and then you see some check and balance. It may not be the courts, because Trump himself put 3 people on the bench who will interpret presidential power a little bit larger than others would have done it. And by the way, war wouldn't be a good thing for the law, as William Rehnquist quoted a famous man, inter arma silent legis. So when the weapon speaks, the law is silent. So some kind of war, and then Supreme Court and everybody's out, and even the Congress is just saluting the commander-in-chief. So that thing always in mind. But if things are normal, we don't have war, I think Democrats could be coming back, but they need to organize. So it takes leaders. When people are on the streets, I mean, yeah, it could erupt, but it would be helpful if Democrats really got their act together. And I used to work for Democrats on the Hill, and they weren't always that well spread all over the place. They used to be organized. They had their game together, but obviously now there's a lack of leadership, and maybe somebody comes out of the blue we don't see yet. If it's, well, yeah, it's a hope, but I think the markets will really take care of things, and we could see a scenario. You placed that scenario. There are different things that could even help Democrats to have an economic story again if the markets crash, and it would make MAGA not so brilliant any longer, because people then realize, okay, he's not really helping us. So the one side would be discredited, and the other side could actually get an idea, a message around wokeism and other things that are as important to people as the current stuff.
So Matt, I'll give you the last word. I see wine is being put out, and I think everybody's going to need
Are you
it.
telling me?
Yes. Matt, the last word to you.
Well, I think if we, one of the reasons for writing the book was a belief that Trump is very good at throwing sand in everybody's eyes, keeping the media so occupied with this event or that event, that outrageous statement that he, is going to invade Canada tomorrow. Instead, we have to keep our eye a little bit on the future, not way out, but really think about these broad things that we have discussed today, such as democracy or war, China and the rest, and really begin to think, also organize how we want to make sure that a lot of the negative things we've said won't really happen. And I don't think, none of this is inevitable. Trump's presidency could be out in 2 years if they lose big in the midterms and lose both houses or one house. But we have to be aware just of what is going on. And I think for Americans particularly, we have to really reconnect with the rest of the world and think about what their needs are, just not what our needs are.
Okay, well, on that sobering note, please join me in thanking Josef and Matt for a very stimulating conversation. Thank you. And am I meant to say anything else? No. No. Okay.
And you were